For people who have overwhelming negative thoughts, I call it stinking thinking. I got that from Zig Ziglar. Uh, and they can't break that habit, Peter. How is this impacting their health and longevity without them actually being aware of it?
Stinking thinking. I might have to use that now. I like that. I mean, look, I would assert that no human is free from that predicament, right? I would actually say it's the game that we're all here to play, which is to emancipate ourselves from not so much the thinking, I would say thinking that sort of slew of negative narratives that we're all more than familiar with is symptomatic of something that's happening at a deeper level, right? Which is what I call these subconscious constraints that I assert, at least, that we all arrived with. That's why we incarnated, without getting too esoteric out of the gate, is that the game of being human is the opportunity to discover true freedom from those limitations with which we have become associated with. So there are different levels, obviously, to the mind and consciousness itself. And so anything that we're aware of in this realm of what you're talking about as being negative, to really, break it down is simply an extension of the deeper genesis of those thoughts, which is some like a constraint that people are oblivious to, right? The idea that somehow someone's not enough, they're not safe, they're not wanted. Something in that realm, what I call a negation of self. I'm not something. So the thoughts that people, become tantalized by and that do impact their health, and I'll get to that part of the question in a second, they're really the byproduct of these deeper constraints that reside in our subconscious, typically that get stimulated or triggered in our childhood by virtue of whatever trials and tribulations and sadly, traumas that we go through. Why that is so, I think, imperative to understand in every arena of life, but particularly as it relates to health, is that, as you know, if we are in a state of dis-ease, is what I call it, right? So if we are in the absence of ease, then on the very simple superficial level, as it relates to the autonomic nervous system, we're going to be in sympathetic mode, right? So we are in fight or flight. Why is that significant? Well, if you're in fight or flight, we could argue the predominant precursor to health, which is digestion, is compromised, right? Fight or flight, sympathetic mode, we all know, means that the digestive process itself is not a priority. Saving your life, running from the bear, not being hit by a frying pan by the missus, these are the priorities, right?
Yeah.
So when you can understand that health, certainly through my lens of studying Ayurveda for 20 years, is the byproduct of good digestion, and digestion in the biggest sense, right? Our ability to not only eat good food, the way we eat it, who we eat it with, why we're eating it. There's a myriad of different reasons that people eat, but then it's not just the digestion of food, right? It's the assimilation and the absorption of food, it's the transportation of food, and then fundamentally at the cell level, the degree to which we're able to metabolize and actually take those nutrients and, through the alchemy of the body, turn them into cells. So that whole process gets interrupted when, to come back to your question, we are in any kind of state of dis-ease by virtue of being misidentified with these limiting beliefs that give rise to negative thought patterns. So it's a big cascade, but when you follow it, it's actually quite simple to realize, people who tend to, in lay terms, worry, live in fear, have anxiety, depression, or some sort of mental health issue, that is going to cascade through our physiology and ultimately become a physical health issue. Now, depending on the constitution you have, if you're built like an ox, yeah, you might get away with it for a few decades. If you have a little bit more of a sensitive disposition, then you're probably going to see symptoms a little earlier on. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, because it's obviously a vast topic, but yeah, basically, if you're living in a prison mentally, then you cannot have physical health. It's that, for me, it's that categoric.
So good, Peter. Yeah, I want to unpack that a little bit.
Sure.
You just reminded me of Vernon Howard's quote, "You cannot escape a prison if you don't know you're in one," right? So this mental
Yeah.
prison we put ourselves in. I,
Yeah.
I love that you referenced the negative thinking, the stinking thinking as a symptom of the actual cause. And that's a theme with what I teach with health and wellness. And the symptoms are feedback mechanisms from the body. And you tied in the nervous system. And I love that you did that, because arguably it's one of the most important things to focus on in health because it's tied to the gut. It's tied to every pretty much facet of health or
Yeah.
dis-ease as well when it's too much on either side, sympathetic or even parasympathetic. So I
Hmm.
track things like heart rate variability as a way to gauge how good my nervous system is at having spurts of
Beautiful.
sympathetic, which is important, but not getting locked there, and then
Yeah.
balancing out with the parasympathetic. And I know for me, mental stress, when I have periods of time where there's a lot of mental stress, I see my heart rate variability decline, showing I'm too sympathetic, and it signals to me to make some changes. So
Yeah.
you mentioned the symptoms are the negative thinking, and it's these subconscious patterns, these paradigms that we have developed when we were a kid. And
Yeah.
I've been exploring this concept of the paradigm in the subconscious mind, and I've studied guys like you, of course, but also Bob Proctor, and I've had gentlemen like Dr. John D. Martini on my podcast,
Cool.
and Bruce Lipton, and these incredible people, and yourself included on that list.
Thank you.
And I have explored what are the different ways to change our paradigm, the subconscious mind. And I want to know if you have found anything different than my research. Personally, I've only found two ways to change the subconscious mind, the
Sure.
paradigm: an
Tell me.
emotional impact, number one, or
Yeah.
number two, constant repetition. Eventually, you create these new neural patterns and new habits. Are there any other ways, or are those the only two ways to do it?
No, I love that. And they're certainly valid and they have their place. And depending on someone's way of processing, they're going to be more appropriate or less appropriate for some people. I would assert the most powerful way, and of course I'm biased because it's the method that I use, is what I called sort of the investigation, the validity of these constraints, right? So it's through the discernment of our own intellect that we get through the awareness of recognizing that the actual subconscious constraints that we live within. And again, it might seem like weird language, but the way I articulated it, it's the you that you are for yourself, right? Which may seem like a weird statement, but it's the you that you are for yourself. So Bruce Lipton, obviously, I was in a movie with him called Heal, and he's got the book Biology of Belief. And people talk about limiting beliefs. What I would assert is I'm talking about something beneath beliefs, because beliefs are something that you're aware of. What I'm speaking to is that which you're oblivious to. And that's why
Mm.
one of my quotes, you're probably aware, I speak in quotes. That's how I download these distinctions. And I say, we can't be held accountable for that which we're oblivious to. And what that does, it invites compassion. It invites forgiveness, that the person who's still smoking cigarettes, who consciously, of course, is more than aware that cigarettes are not good for them, but doesn't know why they can't quit, is because at a deep level, there's something they're oblivious to, which would be these subconscious constraints. So for me, it's investigating the validity of these constraints is the access to freedom. As you said, some sort of emotional impact and then repetition. I would say those are great. The emotional impact tends to happen during the process of revelation,
Mm.
right? Meaning, so when I'm working with someone, they'll talk about their symptoms, both in thoughts and life experiences or circumstance, that they've got some sort of health issue, they've got a relationship issue, they're not doing well financially, there's something going on with their family, whatever it is that we would articulate as a generic problem that humans deal with. What I do is reverse engineer that into, okay, what subconscious constraint must you be misidentified with that gives rise to the cascade that gives, ultimately all of your outcomes, which is context, thoughts, feelings, actions or behaviors, and then results, right? So if we reverse that, then yes, we can obviously talk about what are they consciously thinking? What do they say to their friends? What do they say to themselves? But that's still in the conscious realm. We have to get to the subconscious. Then when we can reveal that, that's the awareness part, shining a light on that which is dark. When they talk about the word guru in Sanskrit, which I certainly don't like to attribute myself as, but it's the Sanskrit translation is one who brings light to darkness, right? So this is the process of revealing these constraints in the darkness of our subconscious. When that is revealed, we see what is it like for that person to live in a world of thinking that fundamentally they're not enough, right? Something that everyone can relate to. Symptomatically, what does that present as? they've got Hashimoto's disease, or they're exhausted, or their sleep is compromised. Well, why is that happening? Because their coping strategy, that which they're aware of, is perfectionism or people pleasing. Right? That's a behavioral adaptation to the deeper context that they're oblivious to, which is at the core of who they are for themselves, to use that statement again, is that who they are is not enough. And then they'll find the evidence. Well, my brother was the athlete, my sister was the academic, they got more attention from my folks, and I didn't. I was a little bit different. I was slightly on the spectrum. Whatever it is that is the evidence for that person's psyche to start the genesis of their identity founded in that constraint that they're insufficient, they're inadequate somehow. Then on top of that are all the things that people are aware of that they're dealing with. As I said, people-pleasing, perfectionism, relationships that don't work, where they feel they're taken advantage of, both romantically, professionally, which over time becomes exhausting. And so now they're having some sort of physiological issues. To complete the answer to your question is we want to get to that context of, is it fundamentally true that who you are is not enough? That is the negation of the constraint itself. So it's the awareness of the constraint. The emotional component, which you talked about, is what is it like to live in that? I'm sad, I'm isolated, I feel very separate to the world, I can never get what I want in life, I'm exhausted. These are the emotional components. So you recognize the world that people live in already, investigate the validity of the world that they've created, unbeknownst to themselves. It's never true, just, punchline, I hate, spoiler alert. Everybody listening, your constraints are not truth. They're just constraints. They're actually just based in words. When you see what that statement has done to your life and then recognize it's based on a flaw, a lie, the process or the experience of liberation and freedom on the other side of that is like something that most people have never experienced, and why I love what I get to do, and hence why my main product is freedom. So there you go. You've got the third string to your bow. It is through the process of reverse engineering, bringing awareness to the constraint itself, experiencing the emotion of living in that, and then questioning the validity of it. It's never true. And then you discover freedom on the other side of it.
Oh, that's so good. We have things that we know that we know. We have things that we know that we don't know, and you're talking about the things that we don't know that we don't know. And
Correct.
it's this programming usually when we were kids, and now we're a 30-year-old adult, 50-year-old adult, 80-year-old adult, and we're just running
Yeah.
on autopilot. So exploring that, where did those thoughts or beliefs come from?
Yeah.
What were the situations, the relationships, the experiences that you had? Once you unravel that, you see
Yeah.
that what you were feeding to it and thinking of it as true, it's actually not true. And you
Yep.
rewrite the story, or you repattern yourself, and then all of a sudden the behaviors change. Did I get that correctly?
Just apart from the last part.
Okay.
So there's actually the beauty of that process is there's no repatterning
Okay.
because it's a revelatory process, right? So the I am statement, which is consciousness itself, everybody knows that they are, which again might seem like a strange statement. They know that they exist, like, hello, there you are, I can see you, right? So there's the I am. What we're doing is we're dissolving the not statement, which is what I said earlier, is the negation of self. So this, I would say, if there is anything proprietary to my work, or at least unique, that is what I've created in my process, is we're delineating, discovering the negations of self. Self exists. And I would assert that self has inherent qualities, the beautiful qualities we want, right? Like freedom, love, power, worth. They're already there. What we're doing is, so that's why there's no reprogramming, is because the dissolution of the constraint reveals that which was already there. Now, that's step one, awareness. Step two is then the practicing of living from your own inherent nature. That takes a little bit more time, and again is going to be usually inextricably connected to the age of somebody, right? The older we get, the more quote unquote convincing our habits and deep constraints have become, and associated with that, the thought processes, the behavioral patterns, the habits are equally going to have what I call a lot of residual self-image. So there's going to be things that now are part of your physiology that really are an extension of those subconscious programs that are going to take a lot of habituation and practice to overcome the old way of like literally being for yourself, the old state of identity. The younger somebody is, that tends to be pretty short-lived. The older somebody is, there tends to be a little bit more focus on repetition. That would be, the second part that you were talking about.
Hmm.
So yeah, so it's less about reprogramming, it's more about dissolution. Again, one of my catchphrases I tell people, I don't solve problems, I dissolve them.
It's brilliant. I love that. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
How important is the environment that we have, that we live in? And when I say the environment, of course, I mean our friends, our family members, our coworkers, and then of course what we see on TV. If you watch TV, social media feeds, billboards, etc. Because I've seen a lot of
Hmm.
people maybe listen to a podcast like this, or take one of your courses, or watch you speak in person, or attend a Tony Robbins event, or whatever it is, and they feel so inspired, they feel so motivated, and they start to make some strides towards those goals, and then their
Yeah.
environment starts molding them back to their old ways, and their conviction is not as strong as the conviction of 10 people saying, what are you doing, that's stupid, this is baloney, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden they stop pursuing their goals. So how important is it for us to clean up that environment?
I mean, it's imperative, I would say. So beautifully articulated, and you really explained it well, and the phenomenon that can happen when somebody has these big epiphanies, only to then realize that, as you said, they step back into an old conditioned environment, which was an extension of the previous version of them,
Mm,
right? So it's the iteration of them that just got dismantled, dissolved, and removed that is actually still at play in all the ways that they have created their life, both literally in the house, the way they put their pots and pans away in the kitchen, to the way that they alphabetize their books or they don't, or their CDs or what. Like all of that was appropriate for the previous iteration of themselves. So equally the way that they communicate with family, friends, loved ones, all of that's still going to be at play. So in order to sustain the new sort of liberated version themselves, they have to update their environment. So that's usually a series of conversations that have to transpire, like with particularly the people that obviously are close to them. You don't, as they say in the Bible, toss pearls before swine. You want to share things that are appropriate with an audience that is going to listen and understand, and explain, for example, that, wow, I used to think X, and that's what gave rise to the way that I spoke, thought, behaved, and all the actions. Now I can see why, quote unquote, I had failures in different parts of my life because of that. And then that person will typically, if it's someone that they love and that they know well, will go, oh my gosh, I can see that. I kind of do the same thing. Shocker, another human being recognizing a constraint within themselves that they can associate with somebody else. And then you go, what I've realized though is that that's not actually true. And in the absence of that limitation, what I can now see available for me is why, right? And then that also inspires the other person so that they now, quote unquote, get their updated firmware. It's really an upgrade to our operating system as a human. And so you at least now stand a better chance to sustain that new view of oneself, because you've got people around you who are speaking into that listening of you. And so it's like, when I've worked with a ton of athletes, Tiger Woods, not that he was a client, I'm just citing him as an example, but he could be, 6 shots behind the lead going into a Sunday, but the listening that the viewers at home and the spectators at the golf course have is Tiger's going to win. And so that kind of pulled his magic out of him. Now, he had done the work to create that environment by virtue of all of his success and his wins and triumphs and accomplishments. So that also then lends itself to, once you've re-educated your environment, whether it be people or things, meaning updated it, then that environment, even on your quote unquote worst day, when you're feeling like you're slipping back into that old, as I said, residual self-image, your environment pulls you back into the upgraded version of yourself. So yes, long answer was all of what I just said. Short answer is it's imperative.
It is so imperative. What about the environment as it pertains to the television and TV commercials and billboards? Because
Yeah.
I would love for you to share with my audience that we might be consciously aware that we don't agree with some of the things that's on TV, but if it's on
Mm.
and we're hearing it and we're seeing it, what's happening at the subconscious level? And before you answer that, I'll share just a quick story here. Every Thursday, I have dinner with my mom. I'm fiance. We drive to my mom's and we have dinner with her. Today's Thursday. I'm going to have dinner with her later on today, and
Awesome.
and we enjoy it. I love my mom. She's like she means so much to me, and I enjoy that time. However, she has the television on and she watches TV on her day off, which is Thursday. And I see her television commercials and I see it's big pharma, big food, big gov, big pharma, big food, big gov. And it was just so, I was so curious about the amount of commercials coming from these big companies that I
Yeah.
did some research and I discovered that 75% of all television commercials in the United States are funded by big pharma,
Yeah.
75%, and
Yeah.
only two countries in the world allow this, the US and New Zealand, and then the majority of the rest come from big food, right? I am
Hmm.
consciously aware that this is what's on TV, and I'm doing my best not to let it penetrate my subconscious mind, and it's just a small hit that I take for that couple hours that I'm there.
Yeah.
However, most people don't have that level of awareness, and I'd love for you to share how what's going on around us, we might be consciously aware or not, but what's happening at the subconscious level.
Yeah, I mean, again, beautifully articulated. You've done your work, and you're obviously a smart cat who's paying attention. So, I mean, we live in a toxic environment, right? Like, you don't have to be a rocket scientist or into keto or metabolic health or even mind architecture, in my case, to understand that the rivers, the soils, the airs, all of it around us poisoned. We've got glyphosates all over the place. We've got chemtrails. Our waters are just littered with God knows what. So we live, unfortunately, in this day and age in a very toxic society. And I would put TV and the noise into that same bracket. It's all toxicity. And unfortunately, to whatever degree, I'm assuming your audience is up to speed with what's been going on in the last 3 years, and they can see through the veil. But the psych ops that happen, the predictive programming, the manipulation through media, which is to fundamentally access these subconscious programs based in, again, going back to the first question, of sympathetic response, right? That everything is a perceived threat. Everything can inspire a sense of fear. You're going to catch the boogie monster off your Amazon box and die. It's yeah, I mean, it's a strong word, but to me it's all pretty disgusting, right? It doesn't have anything to do with the benefit or the betterment of humanity. It certainly has nothing to do with health. We have what's called a healthcare system, which itself, again, is a misnomer, right? That's a fallacy. It's a pretense. It's a sick care system, and it has its place, and it saves lives, and it's phenomenal, right? If anyone's in a emergency/triage situation, being, claws of life, jaws of life, pulling them out of a car, and doctors saving, like, awesome, like, amazing,
Yeah.
right? But that's emergencies. It's got nothing to do with health. Doctors themselves, albeit beautiful humans, well-intended, they've studied for fucking years. They want to make a difference. They care about humans. They obviously care about their family and making a livelihood. All of the things that would attribute to someone who actually wants to make a difference. But they're experts in pathology, right? They've studied issues. That's like me taking one of my MLB players to a coach, and he's like, wanting to improve his hitting average, his batting average. And he says, well, what's this coach specialize in? I say, well, he specializes in striking out. Like, it's like, well, why the fuck am I going to see him, right? It's that asinine. So you start to realize that these systems that are around us, from TV to pharma to food, their focus is it's money care, it's cash care, it's not health care, it's sick care, and that has its place. But again, being an expert in pathology and then understanding the intervention through pharmacology, which is what they're taught, has got nothing to do with, I'm sure, the myriad of things you've spoken about and do that have to do with, as you said earlier, heart rate variability, like doing contrast therapies with saunas, cold plunges, maybe people doing peptides, obviously understanding metabolic health. What does that mean? When am I eating? How am I eating? What foods are appropriate for my particular constitution? What are my sleep patterns like? How well am I exercising and moving my body? What's my mobility like? All of these things are, I would call, in the auspices of actual healthcare, right? So those programs out there, we're in it, right? We're in the matrix. So to what degree does it impact our subconscious, to specifically address your question? I mean, massively,
Hmm.
and if somebody's not willing or based on the karma of their journey, sufficiently ready to wake up to what's actually going on around them, then yeah, they're going to fall prey to the programming and believe whatever they believe and become part of the culture that wants to acquiesce to the powers that be, as though the person in the lab coat or the person on TV or the person in Congress knows what they're talking about. And that's, okay, God bless you. It's not for me to judge what you choose to believe, but I'll be here when you want to ask some questions.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Hey, I want to just briefly interrupt the video you're watching to share something with you. One of my favorite companies that I use for health and longevity and biohacking is a company called 𝙎𝙬𝙎𝙬. And they have a whole range of incredible products, including the blue light blocking glasses you see me wear right now. But one of my favorite products from them is an infrared sauna blanket. Sauna blanket works by raising your heart rate to a workout or a training session. So you burn more calories while you're actually lying down and relaxing. Also, it's going to cause you to sweat. And one method of flushing out toxins from your body is through sweat. There's also one of my favorite benefits, this endorphin release. Every time I get out of the sauna blanket, I feel like I just got a 60-minute massage. So it's easy to set up. It's super convenient. Head over to bondcharge.com/KetoCamp. And if you use the coupon code KetoCamp at checkout, you'll get 15% off your sauna blanket. And actually, any of their products are 15% off with that code. All right, let's get back to today's video. And I think the last 3 or 4 years, there were a lot of blessings that came out of what we dealt with. Of course, there were some tragic things, but a lot of people became aware that the government did not have their best interest when it comes to our health and our lifespan, and how there were a lot of different interests at play there, and it wasn't us. Do you believe that the overall goal, I should say, the goal of why we are getting these messages that we need to treat symptoms, or we need to take this shot or take this pill? Do you think that it's easier to control people when they are unhealthy, and that's the overall goal of this manipulation, is to control people? Or is there something else at play here?
I mean, my honest answer is I don't know.
Hmm.
I mean, I can have my conspiracy theory type speculations. I mean, let's just say, as you put, they don't have our best interests at heart. That's for sure. What is the ultimate end game? I mean, look, we've all heard about depopulation theories. There were the Georgia Guidestones that were blown up conveniently that had literally written in stone that the world population should be 500 million people. That's a big delta, between what they're saying they want versus what is. I mean, it's 7.5 billion people to, conveniently get rid of. So is it about keeping people unhealthy so that they can be controlled? Is it more to actually just getting rid of people? All of the stories about climate crisis, the WHO right now looking like they're about to, take the reins as it relates to future pandemics. I don't know if you've seen that, where they will have say over 193 nations, both what is declared as a pandemic, but also then the protocol that has to be employed, right?
Wow.
It's insanity. It's insanity. Like, there's no sovereignty there, not even with a nation. Like, okay, a lot of people who are savvy enough stayed away from what was being touted as the cure for this, flu that obviously had its own different unique signature based on what seems like a man-made components. But now you wouldn't even have that say based on the WHO, which is insane. And again, you look at languaging, right? Like, people keep talking about this vaccine. It wasn't a vaccine. That's an attenuated version of like whatever it is that you're wanting to fight, right? This was an experimental gene therapy. So even the CEO of Bayer, said, well, we use the word vaccine because it's something that people are comfortable with, because sadly, most people use them on their kids. So again, there's so many layers to the pretense and the lie and the manipulations here. I just don't know what the ultimate end game is. It ain't good. It ain't good for us. But again, is it part of the genesis of our awakening? Is it part of the hormetic effect of, stress that we use in a gym setting, with the feeling of benevolence that I'm doing something hard so that I get stronger, I improve my cardiovascular strength? I would argue that much of the adversity and the the lies and manipulations and these pretty abhorrent things that are going on out there in the world could be put under the bracket of it's emotional resistance training, right?
Mm.
It's psychological resistance training. Can you become sufficiently aware, awake, and discerning that you don't fall prey to the bamboozling of these people who have their sole interest seems to be in control and power and something to do with money. So that's the opportunity. But yeah, the impacts on the subconscious are huge. Whether it's your mum watching TV, God bless her, or whatever you think that might be doing, I think there's bigger opportunities for you to recognize that that isn't going to impact you. It's for me, it's as benign as like I'm going to enjoy like a pint of pretty shitty ice cream sometimes if it's at home. That's all I've got and I want it, relative to the other 90% of my lifestyle, which is pretty impeccable, right? I think we have to embrace our humanity, embrace the dark side, realize that we're all going to fuck up in different ways, whether it be in what we say to a loved one, or what we do in terms of skipping our workout, or the food that we eat, or the fact that we're eating on the run because we're late for a meeting and we're a bit stressed. I think we have to make space for our humanity with all of this. And I would assert on the bigger level, that includes the darkness of the forces that seem to be at play right now. Just doesn't mean I want to subscribe to their programming.
Yeah, well said, Peter. You said something at the end there that I want to expand upon. You mentioned that you're not perfect, right? You 90% of the time or so you mentioned you eat clean, you train, and then you have that, ice cream, whatever it is, where you enjoy yourself, and that
Yeah.
that is human being. That's a human being right there. But I love
Mm-hmm.
that you understand that, and I think a lot of people. I'll speak for my audience. What I've seen with my students, they'll start keto, for example, and they'll be really good with it. Let's say 14 days, and then they have a wedding or they have an event, and it's
Yeah.
one night where they splurge and they go and they eat or drink or do something that was out of alignment with this new lifestyle. And then they take that one day and they beat themselves up. And then that one night turns into 2 days, 2 days turns into 7 days. They
Yeah.
feel like a failure. They have all these thoughts on why this won't work for them. And then they disconnect and then they give up, at least right now, until they try it again. So how do we what would you share for them, for somebody watching and listening who goes through that 1 meal to 1 week to 2 weeks and they feel like a failure? How would you communicate to them that it's all part of the process?
Beautiful question, and I love your commitment to helping your audience. So what I'd want people to first of all recognize is that that process is predominantly a subconscious pattern, right? Virtually exclusively a subconscious pattern. What is actually transpiring is these constraints that I was addressing earlier, the deeper feelings of I'm inadequate, I'm not, enough, or I'm a loser, or I'm a failure, whatever it is at the deepest core of their own identity, is fighting for its own righteousness, right? Meaning the identity and the ego's predominant imperative is to be right. So it's going to constantly look for evidence to validate its own perspective, because it has to. The reason it has to is because it's fictitious.
Mm-hmm.
So in the absence of evidence, and particularly ongoing evidence, and it starts to dissipate, which is, ultimately the game of complete freedom, why we're here, but it's the last thing the ego wants. The ego wants to stick around so it can be right. So whenever somebody does something where they can, like to use your example, do 2 weeks that is exquisite, it's immaculate, it's in keeping with what they declared that they're committed to, and then you get this aberration that is like 1 meal, 1 day, or whatever it is, that becomes the ammunition and the evidence for the ego to go, here's my opportunity to sabotage what my conscious self declared as what I'm committed to, but I actually have been around a lot longer than your recent quote unquote, love story with keto that you discovered at some conference 6 months ago. I've been here since you were a freaking infant, and I'm going to triumph over your declaration of like some sort of improved lifestyle because I'm going to be right that you're a loser. Right. So that's the thing to notice, is the battle between a conscious declaration to a future that inspires you versus this subconscious commitment to a history that defines you, and to be able to discern between the two. So in that moment, how do we overcome it? Well, first of all, the awareness, as I said. Secondly, embrace your humanity. It's okay. shocker, Peter Crone fucks up plenty. It's okay. Uh, um, and then to recognize and discern between the two fundamental programs that are at play. The conscious, somewhat novel, usually, declaration of something, as I said, that is, you've been moved by something that you're excited to explore in terms of your potentiality, up against the behemoth that is decades of conditioning based on childhood traumas, and prior to that, the reasons that you actually incarnated to overcome these constraints that you've had for 30, 40, 50 years. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to predict which one might win. But again, through discernment, intellect, and awareness, you can disarm the Goliath and recognize, oh, that's just the part of me that wants to be right about the fact that fundamentally I don't have any worth.
So good, Peter. For those watching and listening, if they want to go a little bit deeper into this and work with you, what's the best way for them to explore that?
There's a couple of ways. I'm in the middle of my favorite offering right now, which is a 3-month intensive called my Mastermind. So that's where we meet every 2 weeks. It's a format of theory in the morning, where I actually explain all these dynamics, so that then there's, for the nerds out there who want to understand the mechanics of how the mind works and why we create this self-sabotaging identity. And then in the afternoon, I actually do coaching with people who are in the mastermind. So that's so beautiful and inspiring, because everyone can relate. Like, we've got hundreds of people from all around the world. I can't get to everybody, even though there's like usually 100 or so virtual hands up, people wanting to be coached. But by virtue of me coaching somebody with whatever they're dealing with, everybody vicariously gets the same revelation, which is beautiful. So that's one container, is a 3-month mastermind. Right now we're in the midst of it, so when this comes out, we might be close to being done. But people can join a wait list for the next one. We might do one later in the year. A much easier access point, I wanted to make this work really available to people at a very, very affordable price point. So I have my membership platform that is called Freedom, because it's all about committing to finding freedom in all areas of your life. I say it's the merging of spiritual awakening with human optimization.
Good.
So that's what freedom represents. And there's about 60, 70 hours of content in there. My flagship program called Free Your Mind. I've got workshops on anxiety, depression, relationships, consciously creating your future, health. I do monthly Q&As. There's just a wealth of information inside of that. And it's $29 a month, so we wanted to make something available. So they're the best. And then of course you can follow my Instagram, and there's content on there.
That's super affordable, $29. Where do they go to learn about those programs? Just your website?
Just go to petercrone.com. Yeah, and freedom is typically, there's a banner right at the top, because that's sort of our evergreen offering. Otherwise, if you join the mailing list, then you'll get notified about some of the other things. I do occasionally do live events. Typically, it's where I'm hired to go and speak, so it's not always available, but we're looking to do things that would be offered to the public, because we keep getting those requests. But yeah, otherwise petercrone.com, and you'll find freedom, and then sign up for the mastermind.
Awesome. We'll put all that down below. The word freedom, I love that word. Okay, let me share something with you.
Please.
My parents were born in Iran. My mom and dad were
Okay.
born in the Middle East, and they immigrated to the United States, to Miami, in the 70s, and I was born in 84. And I always think about the freedom I would not have if my parents didn't come to the greatest country in the world, the United States. And if they didn't make that scary decision, the life that I would have in Iran, this communistic country, has a beautiful history, but it's so corrupt right now. And my last name, 𝙎𝙐𝘽𝙎𝘽, actually translates to freedom in Farsi. That is my last name.
Wow.
And
That's
it
awesome.
weighs on my heart all the time. And I aim not to take it for granted, the freedom that I have here in the United States. And I have a new book that I'm writing with Hay House that comes out in June of 2025, and it's called Metabolic Freedom as well. So there's a lot of synchronicity,
I love
Peter,
that.
between like your freedom courses and
Yeah.
my value in freedom. I just love that word so much.
Oh gosh, I didn't know that, and I love that you shared that. That's the translation of your last name. That's beautiful. Well, you seem to be a beacon of representing it. So people are lucky to have you as a resource, and that you do this show. And I'm certainly flattered to be on it. And hopefully, some of the things I said resonated. And will help people to discover more freedom in all areas of their life.
Amen to that. We have a few more things to cover here.
Sure, please. Yeah, I'm here.
How important is it to discover your purpose in life? And you know, and I believe the Greeks called it your teleology, the study of purpose. And everybody has a different purpose, which is a beautiful thing, right? Somebody could have the purpose of being the best mom in the world, and she does everything possible to be there for her kids, and that's a worthy ideal and a worthy purpose. And then there's other people who want to have to be the best health educators or best podcasters or whatever it is. We have these unique values and ideals.
Yeah.
Most people are not clear on what's important to them, and they lack that. They lack their purpose. So, how important is it to become aware of what's your purpose, and then live on purpose with that purpose?
I mean, to address the question specifically, like how important, I think what's more important is to understand the meaning of purpose versus the purpose itself.
Okay.
I think people get really hung up on purpose, right? Not that they're getting hung up on purpose.
Got it.
Tongue twisters. So for me, purpose is one of these many words that gets misconstrued. Like people in these circles talk about manifestation a lot. It's tossed around in yoga world and spirituality, and I think that's misunderstood. But purpose, I think it's actually a disservice to people to focus on purpose with its current definition, because it's in the realm of doing, right? So you said whether you're a health educator, you're a podcaster, you're a mother, like it's in the realm of what I do. And so what that does, however subtle, for those who aren't acquainted with their true nature, it puts more pressure on the constraints of inadequacy or insecurity that it's incumbent upon little old me, the misidentified you that you are for yourself, to do something in order to garner love and acceptance and value in the marketplace and really ideally leave some sort of legacy. But that's like asking a 4-year-old to, do a clean with 400 pounds. Like they can't do it. They don't have the foundation to actually build that kind of dedicated, actionable purpose. So for that reason, I tend to look at purpose as more as a state of who you are. And so I would assert, again, just through Peter Crone's lens, that true purpose is equivalent to true presence. So now, why that is so much to unpack in of itself, but when you're present, what it's actually saying is that I'm no longer bound by the subconscious constraints with which I arrived that are causing my dis-ease. So as long as I'm in that state, then any quote unquote actionable behavioral purpose of something that I'm doing in the world is always going to be compromised anyway, because invariably it's a reaction to something. The purpose that a lot of people ascribe to or assign themselves to is often to mitigate whatever is at the deeper level of inadequacy that they're trying to compensate for. So it becomes ultimately a form of manipulation or inauthenticity about who they are, not badly, it's not malicious. Again, can't be held accountable for that which you're oblivious to, so we have compassion. But it's not going to be as fulfilling or successful as it would be if you first met presence. And you can only get to presence in the absence of the constraints that have been holding you back. Then we can have a different conversation about purpose as it relates to something that is in the realm of behavior or what you're doing professionally or charitably or whatever. But until you, quote unquote, and this goes back to sort of the first question, until you free your mind, you can't access true, genuine health. And for that reason, you equally can't access true ability to contribute through some declared purpose. So for those who are a little slow and at the back of the bus, what I'm saying is you have to free your mind first. And guess what? My Free Your Mind program is in Freedom.
Yes.
29 gratuitous plug right there. But yes, so that to me is my take on purpose. True purpose is presence. And then from the foundation of presence, which itself is a huge undertaking, then you get to choose something that is truly in alignment with the skill sets and the aspirations that you have as a human being in this particular incarnation.
I've never heard it put that way, and I love it. I love what you shared. When you kept sharing that about being present in your presence and how we're human beings, essentially not human doings. The Bob Proctor quotes just always come through my mind. And Bob Proctor used to say, and I think he was quoting somebody else, but I forget who. Don't look back in anger or forward in fear, but around you in awareness. That is like
Yeah.
the presence there. And it starts with what this conversation started with, which is freeing your mind, which I love that we started there. Now,
Yeah.
what about addictive behaviors? And just to kind of give you my backstory in a few seconds here, I used to be addicted to video games and drugs. I was obese. I was suicidal. And when I started to
Wow.
when I started to be set goals for myself and fall in love with these goals and these ideals, and I started to strive for it, just transferred the energy I was putting into my bad addictions, and I put it into things that were serving me and serving the world. And I actually used it as a superpower. And I view it being addicted as a potential way to have this superpower if you harness it the right way. And that might be
Yeah.
completely different than the way you view it. I just, from
Yeah.
my experience, that's the way I kind of evolved through it. But what are your thoughts on addiction and it being a superpower if used correctly,
It is. No, and first of all, I just want to, not knowing your history, like acknowledge you for what you both went through and then overcame, and now seem to beautifully be inspiring others to perhaps do for themselves. So I just want to
Peter?
presence that.
Thank you.
It's really, yeah, really, I can't imagine how hard that was for you at times. I've helped a lot of people in the space of suicidal ideation and even attempts. And I know it's kind of given a bad rap, and it's obviously a horrible place for people to be. I actually seen it as a very poignant place in a human being's life, because you don't want to die, but part of you is ready to die,
Mm.
right?
So
So
good. I got goosebumps
you,
when you said that.
yeah, so you obviously, beautifully gave death to the part of you that was addicted to things, the habits that weren't fulfilling you, and the obesity and video games. So awesome. So that's beautiful. And I can now understand why a lot of people are inspired by your messaging and who you be in the world, right? But as it relates to an addiction as a whole, as the understanding, I often use the term that an addiction is where you can never get enough of something that almost works,
Mm.
right? So that's where there's this, in relationships, it's called intermittent reinforcement, where you occasionally get the affection, you occasionally get the love, you occasionally get the acknowledgement you want from a partner or spouse. But for the most part, 90% of the time, there could be abuse, there could be harm, there could be derogatory, maybe even hostile commentary. And so we're wired to want to obviously seek pleasure and avoid pain. But there's an interesting phenomenon that falls more into the bracket of addiction, where as long as we're just getting a hit of something, and then obviously we're getting into the biochemistry, right? We're really addicted more to what's going on within our own system, the dopamines and the serotonins and these neurotransmitters that we feel that are the byproducts of our actions. That's where the real addiction is in terms of the physiology.
Yeah.
It's not to the event, it's not to the substance, it's not to the activity. It's what does it generate and give rise to in terms of our physiology. But for me, the ultimate addiction is to the idea of ourself, right? That's what it really comes down to, is that if who I am, and this goes back to that statement again, the you that you are for yourself, that is the ultimate addiction. So that is the gateway to all of the thoughts, feelings, and then behaviors. Most people focus on behaviors with addiction, right? Don't do this, don't drink, don't do cocaine, don't play video games, don't smoke, don't eat too much. But that's too late down the chain of like creation, right? So if we're really going to understand the devastating impact of addiction, we have to understand that ultimately every human being at the core is addicted. We're all addicted. But what we're addicted to are these narratives that are a disservice to the potentiality of who we are at the deepest level of our spirituality, of the essence of who we are. And when you really get that, it changes the whole framework of what it means to be human, right? Most people are playing the game of amassing. We are accumulators, right? Whether it be followers, money, status, things, possessions, which really speaks to one of the primary constraints of scarcity, the absence of inner worth. And so that addiction can lead to the the over materialization of our lives, that we want to amass things that will garner what we think is some sense of exogenous value and worth. So when you see that, you can never get enough of something that almost works. I can remember saying to a client who was in New York, super wealthy, had unlimited access to her family's credit cards and could do retail therapy as her means of trying to mitigate suffering. And I said to her, there aren't enough clothes in the world to compensate for your belief that you're not enough.
Wow.
And when you really get that, it's so, for me at least, it gives me, pins and needles, or makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, realizing that that's what we're all up against. It's a big beast, right? And I don't mean that in a way to create any kind of a trepidation or fear for people, but the human psyche and the constraints with which we arrived don't mess around. They will do whatever they have to sabotage life. We see it going back to, whoever is quote unquote behind the curtain, pulling the psychops and all the things. Like that is all driven from the misidentification with the limited self that is based in scarcity, inadequacy, and insecurity that's trying to control the masses. It's just no different than the person at home who's not having a fulfilling relationship, or who keeps going back to the fridge too many times and knows that they're struggling with type 2 diabetes. It's the same thing. So it's beautiful because it's the ultimate game of cosmic hide and seek, as I tell people, right? That we're in our own ways playing the Houdini, where we're trying to escape from the limits of our own subconscious. It's just not to be taken, lightly in terms of what's at stake, because it can cost people everything.
Beautiful, Peter. If you're following a low carbohydrate, keto diet, or carnivore diet, this is one of the most important tips. I see a lot of people who struggle with keto and carnivore, and the reason they struggle is because they are losing too many electrolytes. They're becoming mineral depleted. Every cell in your body needs minerals to function, to produce energy, which helps you burn fat and feel good. My favorite minerals and electrolytes are from Beam Minerals. These are fulvic and humic compounds that are bioavailable, that have over 70 minerals in them. It tastes like water. They're carnivore friendly. Let me explain why. There are no anti-nutrients in them. It does not break a fast. As a matter of fact, it could support your fasting window, and it's been a game changer for my health, and I recommend it to all my students. Head over to beamminerals.com. Use the coupon code Azadi at checkout, my last name, Azadi at checkout, to get a nice discount. Beamminerals.com, coupon code is Azadi. Last thing I want to ask you here, I talk a lot about this vitamin. It's a supplement I call vitamin G, and I call it vitamin G because it's vitamin gratitude, and the benefits that come with experiencing and feeling gratitude are amazing. I mean, there's studies if you want that, but you could practice it for yourself and see the benefits that come with vitamin G. I get a dose of vitamin G every single day. I have a ton of vitamin G for you for sure, and I want to ask you what you are grateful for today, Peter.
I love that, Ben. That's beautiful. You obviously have some, wonderful experiences you pull from, as I was saying. Thank you for sharing vulnerably what you've been through, but also for contributing to my lexicon, right? Stinking thinking, and now vitamin G. So, gosh, there's so many things I'm grateful for. I'm grateful for you, somebody who's interested in my work. I'm grateful for the audience that are taking time right now to listen and hopefully find some solace and perhaps freedom and inspiration in my words. I'm grateful for my parents who love me unconditionally, albeit their life, unfortunately, with me was very short-lived. My mum only till 7 and my dad only until I was 17. I'm grateful for the fact that I get to be human and have this experience where I have the chance to break free from the constraints with which I arrived, even though at times they sure are a pain in my ass. And I'm like, oh, really? Like, I thought I'd done enough work. Nope. I'm grateful for the people that have tested me. I'm grateful for girlfriends that, seem to express hatred and animosity towards me that to my inner little boy was really hurtful, but allowed me to see that they're entitled to their opinion. Doesn't mean I want to hear it, but that I can be a big enough man to make space for them to also have their hurts and their wounds come to the surface. I'm grateful for planet Earth, for all the beauty that I've been privileged to experience by traveling around the world and helping people. And I'm grateful to the people that seek my counsel, some of the most extraordinary performers in the world in sports, business, entertainment, and beyond, where for whatever reasons, and another thing I'm grateful for, my mind and the capacity I have to be able to discern the pretenses and lies that people are constrained within, and pop them wide open so that people can discover true freedom.
What a beautiful dosage of vitamin G right there, Peter. I love that. If you enjoyed that conversation, check out the recent interview I did with Dr. Berg, all about eating the right foods on keto and carnivore, how to burn fat and feel good.
Sometimes people think that ketones are a secondary source of fuel and the primary is glucose, but if that was the case, where was this glucose available long ago when our bodies were developing? It's so